Hello and welcome to Moving Communities. Moving Communities is the new platform that's going to monitor and evaluate the actions and the activity of leisure centres in England as a result of the National Leisure Recovery Fund. And today I'm joined by Lisa. Lisa, just give us a quick intro. Tell us who you are and what you do, please.
Morning, Dave. Good to speak to you. So I'm Lisa Forsyth, Director of Max Associates. We're predominantly a consultancy that supports local authorities in terms of how they manage and deliver their leisure services. And I guess in the last 12 months in COVID world, we've been doing a lot of work with them in terms of sense checking how they're working with our operators in an environment really that's been completely different from what we've known before now. So that's kind of where we've been focused.
Yeah, I bet that's been a big piece of work for you guys, because that was something, and I guess it had to fit in with everything else that you do as well, because I know you do a lot of work around procurement and things like that as well. So how have you all coped with that influx of work?
It's been interesting. I guess actually, if you think about it, procurement has gone slightly on the back foot because it's, you know, the market was quite volatile. So where councils were maybe extending contracts for a year during COVID, that happened. But yes, you're flexible. You go where the work is. Yeah, keeps you busy. But no, we've come out alive.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And smiling. And I think there's a few of us starting to feel that way at the moment.
Yeah.
Let's talk about moving communities and this monitoring and evaluation piece. So what Max Associates' responsibilities within the platform? What will you be doing?
Okay, so first of all, I guess it was two ways really. One, we helped work with the team about what information would be useful to know from a local authority perspective in terms of income expenditure and some of the KPIs that are going to be measured. And I guess we also did that with a hat on of what hopefully will be easy for operators to be able to provide, because particularly at the moment, and particularly where operators are working on more of an open book basis than they ever have before, what we wanted to make sure is the data was no more than they should be providing councils anyway to track their deficit positions, the usage, etc., etc. So whilst obviously it's going to have to be in the same format, which might not be how operators are used to reporting, you're hoping from either how they're reporting to their clients or reporting internally, it should be data that they've got at hand. So that's sort of our how we influenced in terms of how the platform was put together. And then going forward from the sort of the service side of things, we'll be involved in, I guess, interpreting the data and particularly working with local authorities to say, what does this mean for me? And I think there'll be some instances where it's simple tracking income and expenditure, but some of the other data that comes out, which I guess we'll go on to, will be more interesting, more insightful, and hopefully it'll help local authorities plan, you know, the future delivery of their services going forward.
Okay. You used a term earlier, open book. It gets bandied around a lot. Just give us an overview of what open book actually means.
Okay, so I guess if you take a normal or an old school contract where an operator would have bid to operate a leisure centre or contract on behalf of a local authority, they tender and go forward, and whatever that management fee is that either they receive or they pay to the council is fixed, and ultimately the operator has to make it work for themselves within those parameters. They do report back, you know, in terms of in various degrees of levels in terms of how they're actually performing, but that is fixed, you know, in terms of that management fee payment. Open book is slightly different. So particularly during COVID year, what's happened is the operators have given their best projections, knowing the circumstances they've got, which, you know, everything has completely changed. But ultimately, on a month-by-month basis, they will then, on an open book basis, show the council what actual income and expenditure was incurred. And ultimately, in many cases, the councils are almost picking up that deficit position. There may be some caps in place, but that, because it's been such a big unknown, that's the massive change that's happened and is taking place this year.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I suppose that led us to then the work that Sport England and DCMS and Treasury have done to find this National Leisure Recovery Fund, the 100 million that's going to support the public sports centres and leisure centres in England. So why is this fund so important? And I guess it's related back to that last piece that you just talked about on the open book piece.
Yeah, well, I think there's two elements to this. One, there was simply on one very sort of high level, there was a gap, wasn't there? Because from a local authority perspective, there was the income replacement scheme for all lost income in terms of the 75 pence and the pounds. And where local authorities had contracted out their leisure services and say, let's just say it's on a break-even basis, there was no funds coming in. But of course, the operator then was suffering loss of income. And so there was a gap that was acknowledged quite quickly. So that's the real quick first one. And I guess the reason though why it's so important, and there's been a little bit of a misnomer, and I think a nuance has been lost a little bit in the press. This fund isn't simply to support contractors. This fund, you know, remember the local authority went out and decided the best vehicle for various reasons to deliver their leisure centres was through a contractor. They'd obviously gone through that process. But this fund, therefore, is to ensure that leisure centres can be reopened for residents. And it's just via the vehicle that happens to be a contractor. And I think that's quite important, because I think some of the, you know, the messaging has come out in terms of, oh, this fund is there to support contractors. It is, but the primary reason they're there is to keep, you know, is to deliver leisure services. So I think that's why it's so important. Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting piece, and I think the opportunity to keep doors open, or let the doors open when we're allowed to, is partly it. But my gut feel is that we need to come back better than we were before. So how do you think the fund will help people to think differently about the services they offer, whether that's inside or outside of the four walls of that leisure centre?
There's a couple of things on this. I think going back to your first sort of point about, or question, in terms of what we've been doing this year, this whole pandemic and the COVID and the financial impact of it has made, I suppose, local authorities question, why do we need leisure centres? Because of course there's been this financial gap. So we've gone back to, whilst leisure officers and us in the industry feel like we're very well versed in why we need them, we've been having to make the case to wider strategic directors, elected members, of how this additional funding this year has been so important. And I think as a national evidence base, we haven't been particularly strong in providing the right data. So this, in terms of the Moving Communities platform, I think is going to be, you know, 3 different ways that jump to my head of how invaluable it's going to be. And I think it really gives us this data both nationally and on a local basis. I mean, if you think about what we're asking and, you know, what's going to come out of it, we're obviously going to have income and expenditure, you know, in terms of that. And that will be really important, going back to the open book basis. Are local authorities comfortable that their operator is tracking how they should be compared to other comparable facilities? Because of course we've got the family groups, which is really important. That's one thing. What really excites me is having the unique user profiles. So having the postcodes that each, whether from a national basis or a local council basis, you can then compare those users to the profile of your local authority area and go, okay, 2 things: who's coming back, who hasn't come back in terms of post and pre-COVID. But now when we sort of start to track and trade, where are those gaps, both demographically or geographically, of people that aren't coming? And then once we know who they are, we can then start doing something about it, talking to those people, putting in different interventions. And whilst from a long time we've had some real strong reporting mechanisms as part of the contractual sort of relationship between local authorities and operators, we still as an industry have not been particularly good. We're great at reporting numbers of visits. We're less good at reporting the numbers of unique individuals and how often they come, and really being honest with that data and using it to plan our services going forward. And for me, that's the most exciting part of what this data is going to provide.
Brilliant. I've described it to somebody as national benchmarking service on steroids. The opportunity for 1,200 leisure facilities to contribute their financial data, whether it be income and expenditure, their participation, as you said, you know, the really interesting piece around the customer experience, which also pulls in some of that demographic profiling that you've talked about there. The opportunity to really start to understand social value and how that looks within what we do and how we do stuff. I think it's just and of course, bringing some Quest Prime samples into there will also help us relate that sort of quality, quantity type thing as well, which, if I'd have been a manager, 20 years ago with all this information, it was just so easy for me to go, right, how am I performing? How are other sites in my locality performing? And then how do I compare to the national picture? Exactly. Most importantly, I guess, and this is one of the bits that you will be supporting on, is sharing that best practice and learning from best practice. So helping people who can't quite get to that best practice, but also sharing people the good practice. So have you got any plans around that? Have you got any thoughts around how you'll do that?
Yeah, I actually think it's, from our perspective, it's going to be slightly wider as well, because in the next, as we can imagine, 3 or 4 years, we've got Philip Hammond, haven't we, this morning saying financial crunch is coming. We don't realise how bad it is. So I can see local authorities' financial resources are going to be absolutely stretched. We can see that coming. And we're seeing this data is almost enabling local authorities to have evidence-based strategies for where they put their resources and investment going forward. Because it's really easy to say, I can't afford my 4, leisure centres. What should I do? That's going to be the question across the country. I can't afford what I've got or what I had. So the question will be, what do we do going forward? This data will enable, and as you say, the whole breadth of the quality quantitative data will allow evidence-based decisions. And it might be, we need to stay as we are. We might go, actually, what we need to do is change both facilities and services. And I think the two are important because of that qualitative side as well. It's not necessarily saying we might have the 4 or 3 buildings in the right places, but it might be saying, actually, the services we're providing within those buildings aren't quite right. So what can we do? And that, I guess, from a Max Associates perspective, in terms of that strategic future planning of service provision, I think is what this data allows.
Yeah, absolutely. That real opportunities to generate the data, the insight, but most important, intelligent, the actionable insight effectively. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And almost, I guess, modeling the what ifs. So what it'll allow us to do is say, well, if we do close that site, or if we do change the product, what will it do? Because we'll have that really good baseline to start from. So
yeah, totally. If you can map all your users, where they come from, their mosaic profile, and then start looking at different facilities, absolutely you can do that what if. I think it's really valuable.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, brilliant. Lisa, thank you for all the support that you've given the sector in the last 12 months, because there's been a lot of work being done. So congratulations on that. I'm really looking forward to working with you guys and sharing this information in a way that people can really use. So Lisa, thank you for your time. You take care and we'll catch up soon.
Lovely. Cheers, Dave. Thank you.